Initial letter alignment. I don't call them initial caps because you don't always have to use a cap. What we're talking about here with initial letters is a technique of starting an article or sometimes starting a paragraph within an article with an oversized and somewhat more decorative character to signify, number one, this is where the article begins, but it also becomes a design element that's used mostly by magazines and editorial, and it's a fabulous technique. I'm just going to show you a few things and show you some of the concerns you should have in formatting these initials. But sometimes the initial is bigger than the headline. I mean, it's a really fun technique to use. The thing is, you have to know how to use it appropriately in terms of alignment. So this is what we call a drop initial, because it drops down into the text. And I'll start off by saying that when I set initial letters, I do not use the automatic feature or the drop cap or the drop letter feature in the software because, as you might have figured, I'm a real control freak and I want to be able to control it to the nth degree, and I want to be able to, so what I do is I set the initial in a separate text box or whatever, and that way I blow up a screen and I drag guidelines and I put it exactly where I want, and that's how I do it. So I'm going to show you what I think are the important things to consider, and my suggestion is you probably will want to do it that way unless the technology has gotten so advanced that you can achieve it with those features. They might have. I just don't go there because like I said, I like to have complete control. But anyway, so what you see here is a drop cap. It's an F with serifs. And the things you have to remember are it needs to align on the bottom with a line of type. Okay? It should align on the left margin somewhere. I don't think this is the proper alignment, which I'll talk about in a moment. This is mechanically aligned. This is aligned right now so that the serifs of that F are aligned with the text below it, okay? And on the top, it should align with something unless you happen to have an initial that's sitting above and below the text, and that's okay too. But if your intention is to have it top align and be a drop cap in the sort of the official sense, the top of that F needs to align with, I say something. Okay, what is that something? Well, it can align with the X height. It can align with an ascending character. It can align with the dot of the I. Whatever you think looks good, it might depend on what's closest to that letter. But it needs to be an intentional decision on how you align that, okay, the top. The bottom, clearly, it's the third line in this case. Now, the thing that's wrong with the left alignment is it looks like it's slightly indented because the predominant axis of that F is that vertical stroke, not the edges of the serif, okay? So the proper way, if you're able to do this, and I'll tell you what I mean by that in a second, would not be to accept this alignment, but would be to pull that character out to the left so that you take sort of the greatest vertical feature, which is the vertical stroke of that F, and align that with the rest of the type and allow the serifs to extend, okay? The reason I say to do it if you can is because many people work, the reality is people work in environments such as magazines, which they might come out once a month, they might come out once a week. Everything is automated, standardized, and a lot of people don't have the freedom and the ability to customize this kind of setting. And I understand that, but it's my job here to tell you, in the best possible world, this is what you should strive for. And certainly if you have a piece in a portfolio, if you have a piece for a really important client and you have the ability, you should take these things into consideration. Here's another drop cap. This one's a little different because it's an O. It happens to be a different weight of this typeface. And what you see here is it aligning, yes, it's aligning with the left margin, and it's aligning with the bottom of the third line. But if you look at the left without those lines, doesn't it look too small? Okay, it looks too small because, as I mentioned earlier, optically, if a character has rounds, actually in the typeface, a round character is going to be constructed so that it is larger and it drops down slightly below the baseline and it sits slightly above the X height. So with that concept in mind, when you're aligning a character like this as an initial, if you don't extend the baseline and the margin, it's going to look like it's too small. So what you want to do is move it, and you can see on the right, is have it extend the margin slightly on the left and on the bottom. Okay, yes, I'm going to.
Okay, you might be getting this, but now what is the drop cap size on that, for example?
3 lines deep.
Is that the standard that you typically use?
No, it's not standard. You could go. I always recommend that it be 3 lines. You could go 3, 5, 7. Once you're 9, you could be anything. It could be and take up the whole page.
Okay.
And the reason I recommend odd numbers when you're going a few lines is because there is a certain pleasing symmetry to dropping an odd number of lines, okay? The only other way I can explain it is if you know anything about flower arranging or you're a gardener, you don't put 2 or 4 or 6 in a vase. You always go for the odd number because it creates a better symmetry. But once you're going past 9 or so, that is not an issue. You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. So that's a little hard to explain, but I think that probably it's a good visual. Another thing I wanted to point out in the difference of this, and this is another thing you have to consider with these initials, is where to start that first line. Now, in this example, this first example, which we've already looked at, the first 3 lines, I'm using a tab, and I set the tab to make it a comfortable space from the second and the third line. But the word once doesn't read that well because it looks like oh-nts, okay? So once again, if you're customizing your initials, the proper way in this particular instance is to tuck in that first line so that the word once reads properly, and then have the other lines aligned the way they were. So again, I'm just going to be showing you just a few examples. What's important is that you understand the concept for whatever kind of an initial you do. You want it to read well with the rest of the word, if you can, to tuck the letter in if it's a letter like an O. That was not an issue with the F. Okay, in fact, this worked for you because the top of the F automatically was very close to that first word, and the other lines, there was enough space. But I did set the spacing in the tab so that the space between the F and the I was similar to the rest of the spacing in the rest of the word. Okay, and the way to do it, you have to blow this up on your screen really large. You can't work with it small because of the pixels. So you have to blow it up. You can pull guidelines to where you want things to match. And then once you do it, print it out, okay? Print it out so you can see how it looks. Here's an instance of a totally different character used as an initial. This is a script, okay? And this is mechanically aligned so that the open quotes align with the margin, okay? But I'm not sure, I think, and also if you look at the right, I aligned the bottom of the curve of the script with the baseline. But if you look back to the left, it doesn't look great. It looks like it's a little too short, and you do see an indent kind of below those open quotes, okay? So this is how I would change it. Now, a number of things changed here. Yes, I did drop the I down below the baseline. So if you don't want to see it with the annoyance of the red, you can look on the left. But if you notice, I also changed the quotes. Not only did I move them, but I reduced them, okay? So in this particular typeface, the position of the quotes are positioned to fit nicely around lowercase. Okay, so if you imagine there was another word, another letter there, O-N-C-E, that's where the quotes are positioned in this font. But when you put it next to a cap, it looks too low. And for my personal opinion, in this instance, I thought it looks a little bit too big. So what did I do? I put the quotes in a separate text box, okay, or text frame. And then I made it, I easily reduced it to the size I wanted, and I dragged it exactly where I wanted. Don't try to highlight, reduce, baseline, shift, kern. It'll drive you crazy, because if you want to go back and find the character again, you'll never find it to highlight it. So make your life easy, try it my way, and try to achieve something like this. Again, be conscious of the decisions you make.